Welcome to this edition. I'm Annie Griffin, your host, and before we get on with the show, I would like to talk a little bit about what hospitals are being pressured into doing, which is to letting us out, patients that is, out too soon. You've probably all heard this rhetoric that, oh, the day that of your operation, it's very, very healthy to get up and walk around. That's the new mode. Well, guess where that's coming from? It's coming from the insurance companies. And I recently had a hip operation. Had to have a hip replacement, and I was in the outpatient section of the hospital, and they wanted me out the second day. And I told them that I had no one at home to help me. And the doctor said, well, you know, you've got to go anyway, and that you're fine, and you'll do just fine. And I knew if I fell, I would be all alone for hours, maybe, days, who knows, not days, because there was someone that would come back at night, but I would be there all day, and I would be wounded. And I did find out later on from the nurses that tended me afterwards. One of the visiting nurses happened to tell me that they had to send patients back quite a lot and say they have no business being out of hospital yet. So this is a big problem, and I called the CEO of my hospital and I said, what's going on? I said, I know it's not my doctor. He wouldn't do this. And he said, you're absolutely right. He said, the hospitals and the doctors are being pressured by the insurance companies, and that's under Medi-Cal. They are being threatened, they won't pay them, and so there's this big push. And if anyone's interested or has a story, please contact me about this. Let's start putting pressure on the state, on our governor, on these insurance companies that are making millions and billions of dollars of profit on us, and they're doing it for their shareholders. So once it happens to you, it's the most frightening experience to be told that you're going to be having to go home and there's nothing you can do about it, even though you have patients' right. I had to tell them that I would contact every news media outlet I could find, and they could just put me out in the street because that's where I was going to go. And I certainly wasn't going to be alone during that time. So please contact me and let's get something happening about this. It's really a big issue, and I've contacted Coast Weekly about this. I haven't shown any interest. It seems Fox News, I contacted them. I've contacted a lot of news outlets, and they're just not reporting it. And I believe it's perhaps they're supported in part by these insurance companies as well. So, having said that, let's get on with our second subject. Thank you for watching. I'm Annie Griffin, your host. NAVES is an organization that is trying to stop unnecessary and indeed all animal testing, because all animal testing really is unnecessary. And terrible mistakes have been made because animals do not react in the same way as we do to different drugs. Yet dogs and beagles are used relentlessly. This is a billion-dollar industry, and the researchers want to stay in business and employed, and the people that supply the dogs want to stay employed and make their money. And so it's just a revolving door of terror and abuse that is unnecessary. And if you go to the naves.org site, they're a nonprofit organization, they have brochures where you can go, and it's called, they have one brochure called Dissection Under the Microscope, and it's adopting humane alternatives to animal dissection. And You can go to NPC. I know that they still dissect frogs and things like that unnecessarily. There's all kinds of incredible new tools in which they do not have to teach the students on live animals. And the high cost of dissection wastes a lot of our tax dollars. The cost for alternatives can range from zero, such as the Free Knaves Dissection Alternatives Loan Program, to hundreds of dollars of sophisticated models or computer programs, and because they can be used over and over, the initial investment of purchasing alternatives is much more cost effective than purchasing dissection specimens. Perhaps the greater, though less tangible cost is the loss to science of many compassionate individuals who refuse to participate in mandatory animal dissection. And as we've learned from hundreds of adults remembering their own experiences, many students are forever turned off to science because of the dissection requirements. Common myths about dissection are, as a student you'll never get into medical or vet school or study the science without dissection. In fact, more than 2/3 of U.S. medical schools have eliminated the use of animals for training doctors, including Harvard, Stanford, Yale. Nor is dissection required to get into college. Dissection is required to graduate. That's another common myth. No state board of education requires dissection to graduate from high school. 6 states already have laws that protect a student's right to choose not to dissect, and entire school districts have also adopted former student choice policies. There's another myth. There is no better way to learn than by hands-on experience. There are many sophisticated alternatives to dissection that have already proven to be academically sound. Students study human anatomy without a cadaver and can learn animal anatomy and physiology from a vast array of innovative alternatives. And then the other myth is, my students love to dissect. No one objects. While many students enjoy the sensationalism of dissection, are they excited about the guts and gore or learning about anatomy and physiology? This is an impressionable age when how students are taught is as important as what they are taught. Many students lack the confidence to express their objections to their teachers and classmates. Teachers should take the initiative of offering the option of an alternative instead of placing the burden on the student. And furthermore, beagles are used extensively. You can see these testing facilities keep these dogs in these horrible conditions and torture them and then kill them after their science has been proven or disproven. These little dogs are so lonely, calling out for help, and you would think that they'd provide at least, some green grass and some open air and something, but these laboratories are just, in my opinion, as you can see, bent on torture, and they don't care. And that's the torture, is that they don't care about these animals. They don't care about their feelings, that they're being hurt. So please go to Knaves and become a member, and go to your colleges if you're a student and protest if they're dissecting these animals. Protest and stop it. If 2/3 and the greatest colleges in our nation, Stanford and Harvard and Yale, can give up animal testing, so can these lesser colleges. Thank you for watching. So sad to see these little dogs. They anticipate the human love. They want human love so badly, and they wag their little tails. And are taken in to be researched upon and operated upon and tortured upon unnecessarily. It's big big business, this. Big, big research business. That's all it is. And they don't need to do this anymore. And then they put him to sleep after they've done their hideous experiments on him. They're all calling for help. Please help us. Please save us. This footage is coming from the Toxico Laboratories, Hertfordshire.
Could be the front page of the Campaigner.
You're about to see a revolutionary film. For the first time ever, a film dares to go far beyond the moral arguments which have been used against animal experimentation for over 100 years. This film exposes not only the terrifying tortures which disguised as science are inflicted upon millions of animals, but also the incalculable damage to human health that such a scientific fraud is responsible for. Some of the facts presented here will directly contradict what you have been told and taught for years, even what you firmly believe in. This is because the conditioning we all have been subjected to, some may call it brainwashing, began shortly after we were born. I am only asking you that you examine the evidence presented here using your logic and common sense. Try to put aside any preconceived notions that you might have on the subject. A word of caution. Some of the scenes may be hard to watch. You can always close your eyes for a few seconds while still listening to the narration. Since this will probably be the most important film on the subject that you will ever see, it is very important that you watch it in its entirety. In closing, I would like to say that this film signals the birth of a brand new anti-vivisectionist movement in the United States. This new movement, based upon the evidence collected by Swiss author and medical historian Hans Rusch, will succeed in abolishing animal experimentation, not only on self-evident moral grounds, but on medical and scientific grounds. This massive body of evidence is contained in his breakthrough books, Slaughter of the Innocent and Naked Empress. All of us, including future generations, are in his debt.
Every single year, some 100 million animals of all kinds are killed in the U.S. alone in biomedical research and testing. These animals are used by universities, hospitals, pharmaceutical and cosmetic companies, industrial complexes of all kinds, and by NASA and the military. The number of animals used by the military is unknown and thus is not included in the 100 million figure. The military tests all weapons, including atomic bombs, on live animals. Animals are also used as surrogates for man in warlike situations. The evidence gathered in this film will prove that animal research is not only a self-evident crime against animals, but also a crime against humanity. Some well-meaning people still believe that animal research can be humane. The fact is that humane animal research is a contradiction in terms simply because the very aim of animal research is to cause distress and pain by trying to recreate disease and trauma. The goal is never to cure, since the animals are always healthy before the experiments. How can anyone burn, mutilate, or shock the pain centers of the brain with electricity in a humane manner? Anesthetics and pain-relieving drugs are not required by law, and thus are not given to an estimated 85% of the animals used. One reason for this can be found in the fear on the part of the researcher that the anesthetic might interfere with the experiment. In many instances, anesthetics are replaced with restraining devices or drugs which allow the animals to feel pain, but which paralyze their capacity to move or cry out. Have you ever wondered why high school students are forced to dissect animals? Since the role of a high school is not to turn out zoologists or veterinarians, the existence of dissection is impossible to justify from either the educational or scientific points of view. The real reason is, of course, that the seed of desensitization has to be planted early.
Hi, I'm a student at a high school. I'm in the 10th grade, and I'd like to give you an example of some of the stuff that goes on. In one of our classes, cellular biology, which you don't have to be a brain to get into, they just recently carried on one experiment with frogs. The object of the experiment was to prove that their digestive tract still works after they are brain dead. So what the teacher did was she took a needle and she punctured the frog's head several times to mash up its brains while it was alive. It had not been killed yet. And then they opened up the abdomen of the frog to observe it still digesting the food. You know, first of all, you know, it's quite obvious that this type of thing is just completely ludicrous. And furthermore, who cares? Who cares?
Dissection is safely shrouded from criticism behind such sacrosanct names as science, biology, life sciences, and lab skills. Standard dissection exercises involve the cutting up of frogs, cats, piglets, mice, and pigeons. Students are also encouraged to participate in science fairs, where they compete against each other for prizes. Some of the projects entered at these fairs are full-fledged vivisectionist experiments involving live dogs, cats, and monkeys. These experiments are conducted by students in their teens. Can anyone seriously maintain that dissecting frogs and mice can teach our children about the human body and how it works? Dissection is an integral part of the pseudo-scientific mentality which controls our educational system at all levels, making the existence and growth of vivisection possible.
Hi,
25 years ago when I was doing my undergraduate work, I was involved in fulfilling all the university requirements to be a physiotherapist. I had to do a lot of dissection, which I did. I dissected cats, I dissected frogs, and so forth, earthworms, and I was good at it. The dissection went very well. Unfortunately, I forgot the fact that it was a class in human anatomy, not cat anatomy, and when I came to take the test, I did a miserable job. I failed the first examination. So then it became apparent that I should spend more time on human anatomy and less on dissecting the cat, which I did. And people today would ask me, what part did dissecting cats and frogs play in my success as an anatomist and a physiologist in that particular class? I would have to say absolutely nothing. Just nothing.
Every year in Britain, around 3 million animals are killed in vivisection. Many millions more are killed as surplus. Worldwide, it's a staggering 100 million. Scientists say they don't suffer. It's not true. They are cut open or have limbs amputated to see how their bodies work. They are slowly poisoned, infected with lethal viruses, brain damaged and starved in psychology tests, surgically mutilated in medical experiments. Why such suffering? They claim it's to ensure the products we use and the things we eat are safe. And they say we'll die from terrible diseases unless animals are used to find cures. Everyday products are tested on animals. It's called toxicity testing, which means poisoning. There are no anesthetics to stop the pain. Products are sprayed, injected, or force-fed to animals and the effects monitored, for months even. This is the Draize test, used for testing chemicals. Rabbits are used because they have big eyes and no tears to wash away the chemicals, or the pain. Most experiments are done without anesthetics, and there's no guarantee of painkillers when the animals come round. Even when they are anaesthetised, it's often not done by a professional anaesthetist. Carrying out brain surgery on a monkey involves great pain. They say it's mostly rats and mice who are used, as if they don't feel pain. In fact, many different animals are used. Including, of course, dogs. Beagles are used because they are friendly and trusting.
It's wet, I shouldn't sit back too far, it's pissed everywhere. You've had it shut up. Sit still.
What a way to repay them.
I haven't got the patience today, I really haven't. Oh, shut up. Hey, hello! I'm really getting bad with you!
Then, of course, there are monkeys. Many are imported from abroad, and some are caught in the wild. Just imagine the fear and confusion these animals suffer when they're torn away from their family groups. These barren cages are the only home they'll know until they are experimented on and killed. They are all eventually killed. Not all researchers are deliberately cruel. They become hardened, and the animals become little more than research tools.
There she goes. She's on TV, holding her monkey.
Regulations aren't enforced, and the main purpose of the law is to protect researchers from being prosecuted for cruelty, not to protect the animals.
I think some people have asserted that animals don't really feel pain as an argument for doing experiments on them, but that has to be classed as nonsense. They have all the biological and physical characteristics in place that I have for pain, and they have the chemoreceptors there that can do the job, so I'm sure they feel pain.
I feel that doing animal experiments, inflicting pain on animals, must have a desensitizing and a brutalizing effect on people. Despite this, none of us protested for a moment when a rabbit was battered to death in front of a class, and this had a very subtle and I think very damaging effect on us as future doctors.
I don't think the science is very sound. I don't think that the morals and the ethics have been worked out as well as they should have been, and to think that animals are lower than we are and therefore we can do what we like is a very troublesome argument.
A lot of people don't really know what a human study is. And a lot of times when they hear the word, they immediately think of what they know about when it comes to animal studies. And they think, oh my gosh, how terrible that you would treat people like we treat our lab animals. The reality is that in a human study, it's actually the only humane way of doing a study. And this is because humans have rights. If you're mistreated, you can get legal action and hire someone to represent you, where the lab animals can't do that. So the reality is, when it comes to a human study, it really is the best way to go. It is not at all like an animal study. And there are many benefits for doing it. For one thing, an animal study is a very, very controlled environment. And this is incredibly unnatural. People are not locked in a confined space and fed the same thing for up to 2 years. And in general, the parameters can be set anyway. But generally speaking, a lab setting is incredibly unnatural. And so that alone really isn't a good way of finding out what works well in people. Maybe with some pharmaceuticals, but when it comes to overall health and wellness and really learning about an organism, it is almost the worst way to learn about one, because it is so incredibly controlled and no one is going to abide by that in actual practice. The other thing is that animals biologically are not the same as humans. And though we may be very similar, for instance, there are many cures of human diseases that are actually deadly in animals. And that's a perfect example of how you can easily understand where vice versa would be very dangerous for people. And this happens also. There are plenty of animal studies that are proven safe in the lab, and yet in practice we start to see malpractice. We start to see people coming up with extremely bizarre symptoms, very dangerous, and sometimes even death. And we've all seen those commercials when it comes to attorneys trying to basically take everything back, which the reality is you can never really undo damage like that. It's so unfortunate when there's a malpractice. When it comes to a human study, these are individuals that, for example, have a deadly disease that there is no cure for, and so they have nothing to lose, and so they try many different methods to treat it. And the great thing is that just like you and I, they are living their lives as normally as they can. And so it's not a lab environment. It's very realistic to what someone would expect when they're getting treatment. Of course, it depends on the disease as far as what they can or cannot do, but at least it's comparable to anyone else with the same thing. So in the end, a human study is best for humans because that is what we are. We know it'll work because it's been tested. It also is the most humane method because people have rights and animals don't, unfortunately. And on top of all of this, it really is just the best way forward. You're learning about the organism itself. These are people who are already looking for a cure for themselves, who are testing and pushing boundaries that you just wouldn't get in the lab from an animal. And we're not rats, mice, rabbits, cats, dogs. We're just not any of these animals. We're not these things. We can be similar, but we're not the same. You know, if you have a dog or a cat, there are certain things that are safe for us, but very toxic for them. Perfect example of why animal studies are just not conclusive when it comes to human ailments. Thank you so much, and I hope this was helpful.
Since the last nugget on how animal testing kills humans, I've had several inquiries about what viable alternatives there are. By the way, now that Ubi's back, you'll be hearing this in the background. Now, animal testing isn't just dangerous for humans, completely ineffective in producing any scientifically viable result, and totally driven by greed, but it's also not the only option. During a government meeting about funding for research, former U.S. National Institutes of Health Director Dr. Elias Zerhouni admitted that experimenting on animals to help humans has been a major failure. He told his colleagues, "We have moved away from studying human diseases in humans. We all drank the Kool-Aid on that one, me included. The problem is that animal testing hasn't worked, and it's time we stop dancing around the problem. We need to refocus and adapt new methodologies for use in humans to understand disease biology in humans." Stated most simply by Drs. McLennan and Amos, there is no doubt that the best test species for man is man. So what are the alternatives? I'll be pulling a lot of my information from the Johns Hopkins University Center for Alternatives to Animal Testing. Now, we don't have time to cover all of the alternatives, but here are the basics. There are three main categories. The first is sophisticated tests using human cells and tissues. This is known as in vitro methods. Then there are advanced computer modeling techniques, often referred to as in silico methods. And third, there are studies with human volunteers. These and other non-animal tests are not hindered by the species differences that make applying animal test results to humans difficult or impossible. And they usually take less time and money to complete. So here are some examples of in vitro testing. Harvard University's Weiss Institute of Biologically Inspired Engineering has created organs on chips that contain human cells grown in a state-of-the-art system to mimic the structure and function of human organs and organ systems. The chips can be used instead of animals and have been shown to replicate human physiology, diseases, and drug responses much more accurately than crude animal experiments do. Artery on a chip has been used to study heart disease. Canadian scientists have developed microfluidics chips to enable fragile blood vessels to be studied easily and cheaply. The device will allow thousands of potential new drugs to be routinely screened for their effects on blood vessels. Harvard's Weiss Institute produced a breathing lung on a microchip in 2010. Weiss researchers were later awarded a grant to develop a spleen on a chip to treat sepsis. Now they have produced a physiologically realistic gut on a chip, which enables them to study much more complex interactions than previous cell cultures or animal models. They are currently working on more than 10 different organs, with the ultimate goal of linking them together with fluidic channels to produce a more representative model for testing medicines. Detox, bought by Ciprotech, developed a method to assess the potential of a substance to cause a skin allergy in humans that incorporates Mattech's epiderm tissue model, a three-dimensional human cell-derived skin model that replicates key traits of normal human skin. Researchers at the European Union Reference Library for Alternatives to Animal Testing developed 5 different tests that use human blood cells to detect contaminants and drugs that cause a potentially dangerous fever response when they enter the body. The non-animal methods replaced the cruel use of rabbits in these painful tests. Now some examples of in silico models. Researchers have developed a wide range of sophisticated computer models that simulate human biology and the progression of developing diseases. Studies show that these models can accurately predict the way that new drugs will react in the human body. Now some examples of research with human volunteers. A method called microdosing can provide vital information on the safety of an experimental drug. Volunteers are given an extremely small small, one-time drug dose, and sophisticated imaging techniques are used to monitor how the drug behaves in the body. Advanced brain imaging and recording techniques, such as functional magnetic resonance imaging with human volunteers, can be used to replace archaic experiments in which rats, cats, and monkeys have their brains damaged. These modern techniques allow the human brain to be safely studied down to the level of a single neuron, as in the case of intracranial electroencephalography. Yet another alternative are human patient simulators. These are strikingly lifelike computerized simulators that breathe, bleed, convulse, talk, and even die. They've been shown to teach students physiology and pharmacology better than crude exercises that involve cutting up animals. Most high-tech simulators mimic illnesses and injuries and give the appropriate biological response to medical interventions and injections of medication, and have been shown in numerous studies to impart life-saving skills better than courses that require students to cut into live pigs, goats, or dogs. So as you can see, there are plenty of viable alternatives to animal testing. The whole thing is a pretty shitty idea, regardless of the existence of alternatives. But given that there are alternatives that are cheaper, cruelty-free, and more effective, there is really no reason to continue testing on animals.
Please visit bitesizevegan.com and sign up for the newsletter, and be sure to subscribe to the channel, as well as watch all of the Bite Size Vegan Nuggets on the Bite Size Vegan Nugget playlist.
And if you're a Facebooker, check out Bite Size Vegan's Facebook page, and go ahead and friend me too to see what I'm up to.
Plus, follow on Twitter at BiteSizeVegan.
Hello, and thank you for having me. Like Ben said, my name is Sarah Olson. I'm a UW sophomore, and I run CARE, the Campus Animal Rights Educators Club on campus. This talk was inspired by my animal activism at UW, and now I would like to share my idea with you. This is Coco. He was my best little friend for 6 years. From him, I learned the importance of compassion, devotion, and an organic diet, and never to be afraid to ask for what you need, which in his case was lots of fresh veggies and attention, a need he made known by constant chirping the moment you came in the door. Animals like Coco, full of love and intelligence, are used and euthanized in labs regularly. We need more humane biomedical research to save them. A commitment to the funding and development of alternatives to animal research models is vital for these animals. And this is my grandfather. He died 13 years ago due to prostate cancer. He was an esteemed American history professor at Oberlin College, and I wish every day that I could share my college experience with him. People like my grandfather, with endless insight to bring to this world, leave us too soon every day. We need more effective biomedical research to save them. A commitment to the funding and development of alternatives to animal research models are vital for these people. And why do I believe in the power of alternatives? Well, I grew up with photos of mouse brains all around my house. My father is a pediatric oncologist and constantly leaving his research open on the family computer or on the dining room table. And I'm telling you, if you want your vegan teenager to spend less time on the computer, this is your solution. Obviously, my father and I have an interesting dynamic. We have both made great strides in the areas that we feel passionate about. For him, fighting cancer, and for me, fighting animal oppression. And I know we will continue to fight for these things until the day that we die. But what does this mean for our everyday interactions? How do we relate when our interests are so seemingly pitted against one another? We came to the answer recently. We came to the conclusion that there is an urgent and pressing need for the funding and development of alternatives. And we need more effective research models. Currently, 9 out of 10 drugs that proved effective in animal models failed in human clinical trials. And Francis Collins, director of the National Institute of Health's Human Genome Project, admits that animal toxicity tests in the past have been expensive, time-consuming, used animals in large numbers, and didn't always work. We need better models not only to save animal lives, but to save human lives as well. More precise research models have the power to drastically improve and advance biomedical research to the point where we have more reliable and readily available medicines for the people in our lives. And better models are already being created. My favorite example is Harvard's Weiss Institute's Organs on Chips. These microchips, about about the size of a flash drive, are composed of clear, flexible polymer containing hollow channels lined with real human cells. They simulate the microarchitecture and function of living human organs, such as the lungs, heart, and intestines, and hope to one day replace the use of animals in science. The Weiss Institute created these chips due to the fact that it can take years and upwards of $2 million to test single drug compounds. Meanwhile, animal lives are lost and often fail to replicate human responses, as traditional animal models do not accurately mimic human physiology. The Institute hopes to build 10 of these chips, link them together, and mimic whole body physiology. This would allow for real-time assessment of culture tissues, new drug assessment, and toxicity tests. They believe that these chips could be a viable alternative to animal use in the future. Could be a viable alternative to animal use in the future. And we should all make the commitment to ask our leaders to invest in alternatives, because medicine plays a role in all of our lives. It's a challenge, but I say we go for it, for the sake of medical progress and for the sake of the countless souls lost in animal research every day. It should take priority to ask our leaders for this, and while it may not happen overnight, it will take years of brain power and hard work, we need to make these commitments due to the fact that the FDA still requires that certain classes of drugs be tested on animals before moving to human clinical trials. It should take priority to create models so reliable that the FDA can change these regulations. Recently, I began to make a list of ways in which anti-animal lab activism could become more effective and more inclusive to all types of people. First, we have to ditch the evil scientist meets crazy activist dichotomy. It gets us nowhere. We need to leave these stereotypes behind in order for progress and collaboration to be made. A recognition that scientists are equally as passionate about their work as activists are about saving animal lives is vital, and that neither passion is inherently malicious. And furthermore, these stereotypes are often just plain wrong. If all activists are crazy and all scientists are evil, then my family just got way more dysfunctional. And secondly, we need to understand that asking institutional decision makers to shut down animal research programs may feel to them as though they are being asked to put their institution at a disadvantage. If we, as scientists, activists, and citizens, come together and ask institutions for alternatives in addition to a reduction or halt in animal use, we are no longer asking decision makers to solely make an ethical decision, but to make a scientifically progressive decision as well. My hope is that my university will not sacrifice our reputation as a world leader in science, but rather enhance it by investing in alternatives and subsequently reducing animal numbers. Alternatives can and should be a marker of scientific excellence and a goal that all scientific institutions should strive towards. And finally, we have to leave behind the widely believed notions that animal models are highly predictive of what will happen in human clinical trials. This simply isn't true. In any other industry, there would be no tolerance for the low-quality predictions that these models provide, and yet scientists continue to use these models because the stakes are so high in finding cures. It is currently believed that animal models are the best methods available. Let's change this. Let's make the best methods available actually be the best they can be, highly reliable and state-of-the-art. In this sense, a commitment to alternatives is beneficial to scientists, activists, patients, and animals alike. And it's up to us to ask for it. My hope is that my university will commit an annual budget to the funding and development of alternatives to animal research. And my hope is that labs and universities across the nation will follow suit. My hope is that scientists and activists will come together to show the world that animal activism can be scientific progress, and that through these efforts, such reliable alternatives will be created that the FDA will not require animal testing or research under any circumstances. What are your hopes? What are your dreams for the future of lab animals and for finding cures? This is a pivotal moment in the history of biomedical science. Will you join me in moving forward? Thank you.
We're now going to talk about fracking in Monterey County. I hope everyone listening here is going to contact their Monterey County Board of Supervisors, because right now they're sort of sitting on the fence about whether or not they should allow fracking. Well, when we have such a drought problem, number one, that we can't even find enough water for our food, for these supervisors to be sort of sitting on the fence because they want to placate the oil industry with fracking is inexcusable. Now, I know Jane Parker and I believe Dave Potter both would like to make sure that fracking is not allowed here under the circumstances. I mean, I don't know how much chemicals are used, poisonous chemicals are used, injected into these wells, but it's a frightening scenario. So we're going to talk about see a little video here that one of the locals put on YouTube about the solution to having to use fracking. There's a lot of talk about fracking and natural gas as being the next clean energy source, but it's not. That's oil company, in my opinion, rhetoric. It's solar panels on rooftops across America. So I hope that you're going to contact the supervisors. I'm going to put their number up here right now for you, and all you have to do, that's the clerk of the board there, and you can say, I don't know who my supervisor is for my area where I live, and she will direct you right to them, and then say, I want you to make sure that there is no fracking in our county. We just can't afford it. So let's go on and listen to what this gentleman has to say.
2014, California is looking forward to a 20-year drought, and this is a small creek in Sonoma County where I'm going to videotape this section of it every year just to see what impact the drought has on this small creek. And in March of this year, there's a rally being developed statewide to bring thousands of people to Sacramento to protest against fracking. But those of us that are going, many of us are going, actually are proposing, instead of just opposing fracking, that we install solar panels on all these houses. Here's a house across the street from this creek that would be a perfect place to put solar panels because it's got great exposure, great angle, and there's another house behind, or a shed. And all of these houses could be not only harvesting their own solar energy to eliminate the need for gas, but also selling the surplus energy onto the grid, and that way producing income. We have to stop the particles and CO2 in the atmosphere, which is causing global warming. And the only way we can really do this is by putting solar panels on every house, every shed, every barn in the state of California until we've totally replaced the amount of energy we need with solar and wind. California has a tremendous amount of solar, and so could achieve 100% solar and wind by 2016 if 5 activists in each city was to petition the city council to pass a solar feed-in tariff requiring the utilities to pay homeowners like these homeowners here 49 cents a kilowatt hour for harvesting solar energy and feeding it onto the grid. If people do not do that, then we have a problem, because we need to do that in order to shift the energy policy from gas to solar. We have to shut down coal, shut down oil drilling, and shut down nukes. And the only way we can do it is first pass laws requiring the utilities to pay 49 cents a kilowatt hour to anybody harvesting solar and feeding it onto the grid. Thank you. That is the solution, the best solution. It's not like we have to reinvent the wheel. We don't. Germany's been doing it for 20 years. Japan's been doing it for 3 years. In the 3 years Japan's been doing it, they've had all their nukes shut down, and the lights have still stayed on because they're building 1,000 new solar-powered homes every day.
TV, connecting you to the world. Link TV is viewer supported. Watch more at linktv.org.
Today on Earth Focus, the risks of natural gas development in the Marcellus Shale, from toxic chemicals in drinking water to unregulated dumping of potentially radioactive waste. Are the health consequences worth the economic benefits? Coming up on Earth Focus. It's called Marcellus Shale, and it contains enough natural gas to supply all U.S. gas needs for 14 years. But gas development here can be a catastrophe in the making. Toxic chemicals and methane gas seep into drinking water. And now, experts fear something worse: radioactive radium in waste products. The gas business may be booming, but at what price for people? Britain's Ecologist TV explores the social and ecological consequences of gas extraction in the Marcellus Shale in this original investigative report.
This is Bradford County, northeastern Pennsylvania. This previously quiet corner of America is now at the center of a rush for natural gas, extracted through a new drilling technology called hydraulic fracturing, also known as fracking. But as the ecologist discovered, fracking is a high-risk process that threatens to both destroy the environment and wreck lives.
It makes me mad. It makes me very mad. Because my life is over without my water.
There was just like this red, nasty water just coming, just oozing out the side of the mountain, just the side of the hill.
And now hydraulic fracturing is heading for Europe. The UK, Poland, France and Germany are all next in the frack firing line. This is a picture postcard part of America, but beneath these rolling hills lies a seam of gas-rich rock called Marcellus Shale. But the shale gas is far from easily accessible.
The process itself is that you drill down a few thousand feet into a layer of very dense shale, turn the well horizontally, go out, and perform some other operations. Eventually you set off charges that blow holes in the pipe, and then you fill up the pipe with a liquid, and the intent is basically to get sand back in the cracks of the rock to hold it apart so the gas will flow.
Gas drilling sites, or frack pads as they are known, have begun to appear all over the countryside, but these are just the tip of the iceberg. Professor Tony Ingraffia is one of the world's leading pioneers of fracture mechanics.
The fact is that Pennsylvania is 3 years into a 30-year large-scale industrial development. There are fewer than 2,000 Marcellus wells in Pennsylvania right now, but they're drilling them at the rate of 4 to 5 per day, and the rate at which they're being drilled is increasing. The industry intends to drill between 3,000 and 5,000 wells per year for the next 30 years in Pennsylvania, and if they get their way, in New York.
With many farmers struggling to remain profitable, the large royalty payments offered for land means that many are readily selling off their mineral rights. For others, there is also the promise of new jobs. And on a national level, it is argued that shale gas is a step towards energy independence. But in the rush to drill, concerns about the potential risks of fracking are being swept aside.
When I first heard about shale drilling, it sounded like a pretty good idea. The thing that really got me interested and concerned was I found out that under the proposed regulations for New York State, you could drill a gas well 150 feet from this river or the lake that feeds it, which is the water source for this village. And that's just insane.
One of the first problems observed in communities close to intensive fracking sites has been the contamination of domestic water supplies. The ecologist spoke to families who have been unable to drink water from the tap since the gas companies started fracking on land close to their homes.
And I didn't tell Ronnie anything about it until probably a couple days later because it got worse. I thought maybe this will go away. I don't know what it is. But it didn't. And I said to him, I said, you know, we have a problem with our water.
Water is a commodity. You might not think it is when you have it and it's good. But when you lose it, it's gone. You'll never get it back. Like we would take a glass of water out of the tap and it would have like an oil base on the top. You could smell it. It would smell like diesel fuel or some kind of oil thing. You know, I used to go to my sink and get a glass of water. I can't do that anymore. I have to put lotion on my hands 3 times a day from using the wiring. Even wash my dishes or wash my clothes or anything.
Meanwhile, increased levels of methane gas in water supplies have been reported in areas of intensive drilling.
This is the water that's in my well, and supposedly I'm supposed to be drinking this.
One of the key problems with the fracking process is its reliance upon huge volumes of water that are combined with an array of harmful chemicals. Carolyn Knapp is an organic farmer.
I don't believe that they should be allowed to put chemicals into my ground, chemicals that are not allowed by my certification to be put in the ground, chemicals that I feel can do harm to my family, to the people around me, and I feel violated.
None of those chemicals are potable. You know, methanol, hydrochloric acid, ethylene glycol, it's about 1/2% of the fracking fluid is a chemical, or is it really a cocktail of chemicals? And but do the math on that. That means that's 5,000 gallons per well is chemicals, or toxic chemicals that goes in. So if there's 8 wells per pad site, that's 40,000 gallons of toxic chemicals.
And we're losing farms far too quickly as it is, and to have one more circumstance that makes us lose the farms quicker is all the quicker that they'll be gone. There will be no more small family farms.
The rush for gas has had other effects on the local community. Small towns have become clogged with gas industry trucks.
I have to say the days of having a nice conversation sitting out in front of the diner are long gone. Main Street's noisier and louder now than ever as a result of the large trucks that the industry requires. They run non-stop 24 hours a day through town, and yeah, the noise is louder than ever.
Whilst the increase in traffic represents an inconvenience for local people, the high volume of trucks point to far more serious problems.
Once the chemicals are injected and the fracturing process is complete, a large percentage of that fluid comes back out. So we have purposely polluted large quantities of fresh water with chemicals that do not belong in the human environment. And now we have the responsibility, the industry and the landowners have a responsibility to dispose of them properly. But